Okay, so now that we have gone through the exercise of deploying our Python backend, right? We want to have a process where we can regularly update that code without having to do a lot of console access, right? We want to do more of a normal development workflow involving source control and whatnot. So we're basically going to go through an exercise of creating a new user. In this case, we're using developer fred.administrator right now, and we're going to switch to using a fred.developer. So basically, the idea is that when Fred is administering this, maybe during development, he will use different credentials than his administrator account. And so now I've done already this already. There's an article essentially that we're going to follow called Set Up Steps for Secure Shell Connections to AWS CodeCommit for Linux, Mac OS, or Unix. I'm assuming there's a Windows version too. Yeah, right below it. So I'm going to do this one because that's what I'm running. And the first thing we're going to do, actually, I'm going to step back. Before we start this, I want to do is I want to create a new repo because that's the last step of this step is, so you go to CodeCommit, right? I'm still logged as administrator, and I just say create repository, and I give it a name, hit save. Now, I already did this earlier, so you can see that I've already created one called Backend, right? So that's essentially, right, we have a repo called Backend, and we're ready now to follow these steps. And I'm not going to do them all here on screen because they're pretty much outlined here, but I'm going to sketch through it, right? So the first thing I did was I created a new user, and they give instructions here. And in particular, I assigned that user AWS CodeCommit power user. Now, actually, in my example, I actually created a group called developers, which has that policy associated with it. And then I associated that developers group to the new user. So that's one slight difference from this example. And if you kind of walk through the UI when you create the user, that'll kind of happen naturally. I've already gotten Git installed. It was one of the prerequisites to this video, so you should have already had that. There's some very particular keys around generate particular steps involving creating some public and private keys associated with that developer user. That's why it was kind of very tedious to try to do on camera. So you go through this whole thing, you copy some stuff, you edit some files, and before you know it, you're able to basically clone the repository. So what that amounts to doing is you grab that link to the thing, and then you go to your command line, and you say git clone, and then you just paste. In fact, I'll do it again. I already did it a minute ago. Force recurve backend, and if I say git clone, paste, should pick up, and then I've got a backend folder. Okay, so now I've got an empty repository, but I want to get a copy of the code that I was working from previously into here and push it up to my online repository. So so if you go to the LinkedIn public repository, that GitHub, you'll look for the Docker branch. So if you go to, I'll just double check it here. It's called to-dos RS backend, and there's a Docker, and there's one hidden file I think that we'll need. There's an app folder, there's this. This environment file is not actually in the repository. Neither is Git, but the git ignore is. So we'll want to grab most of the stuff that's here, not all of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do copy. I guess I'm going to do this tedious. Well, I'm going to do this. Well, I'll do it here. It's kind of tedious. App. I want to move this to backend. I want to copy Docker Compose to the backend. We want to copy the Dockerfile to the backend. Not the environment file, not the Git file, but we want to copy the .git ignore file to the backend. Copy scripts. Okay, and not the VS Code. Okay, the reason why I knew all this is that there's the .git ignore, you know, basically says the VS Code and the environment file don't push up. So if I get everything right, I should be able to go to Backend, get status. It says I had some files. That looks like the right files. I get add, all, get commit, first commit, and I should be able to do get push origin master. And if everything's right, it should be pushed. And if I go to CodeCommit here, go to Backend, I should now see my files. Okay, so now we've got our backend, code now stored in CodeCommit. We're developing on the command line. We're developing as the developer user, not as administrator user, right? I'm still logged in as admin on the screen here, which is fine, but we're developing as the developer user. The next step we're going to do is we're going to go through an exercise of now using another tool called CodeBuild that will take the, starting from this repository, as we apply changes to this repository, it will generate new Docker images in that repository. So I'm going to pause the video while I kind of get organized for that. Back. We're going to do one, before we start doing anything with CodeBuild, we need to make sure we can manually deploy with this credentials, with this logged in user, right? Fred.developer. We need to make sure that this credentials can actually push basically to that repository. And one of the steps here is we actually need to give additional rights to this user. So right now I'm still logged in as administrator over here. So I'm going to go back to IAM and I'm going to give Fred.developer additional rights. Or actually, I should really just go to the group called developers. And I'm going to attach another policy. This policy is going to be ECR. Not right. I thought it was ECR. Elastic. Okay, let me pause the video while I find this. I thought it was ECR. Give me a second. Apparently it's not ECR. It's Amazon EC2 Container Registry Power User. Right, I believe that's it. Yep. It's throwing me off. It says EC2 though, because this is really, well, wait. This is definitely the container registry. Okay, so this is it. Okay, so then we are going to validate that we can actually push with my local account. So if you go back to registry, ECR, right. And if you look at to-dos or us, the view push commands, we're going to try to go through these steps and make sure we can do it. So the first step is we need to copy this with this credentials. We already logged in as that user here. And if it works, this should work. Login worked. Okay, that's good. We've already built, but I'll build it again just to be, go to the steps. Paste. Okay, got to build. Oh, what did I just do? Just lost my window that I was trying to show. Okay, this is what I was trying to do here. I did a build, then I need to tag it. And that's done. Oh, I keep on clicking away from it. Okay, and then the last step is to push it, and this is really, want to make sure I have rights to do. Paste, push. Okay, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video a second, just to regroup again. Back. Okay, so for doing CodeCommit now, or CodeBuild, I'm sorry, one of the first things we need to do is build this file called a build spec file and commit to our repository and push it. Now I've already done this once. I'm just going to walk through it to make, because I wanted to make sure it worked first, right? So there's a file we need to create, and then the details of this file, I had to kind of piece this together from like multiple sources, which is unfortunate. So I went to the official documentation that they have on CodeBuild, and they have an example called Docker sample. So I went through this example, and you had to kind of scroll past a bunch of garbage, but you get down to this build spec file, and you notice that they have this. The format starts with this version. They have a phase called install where they tell it to use Docker 18, and then they have a pre-build, build, and post-build sections. And if you look carefully at this, this is essentially what we did manually, right? But not without the, not with the environment variables, but like we had specific values in here. And it was slightly different than this. So I went back to Amazon ECR, which is essentially what we're doing, and I looked at the steps that we had here. This is what we did manually. And essentially, I used these values instead when I built my YAML file. So basically, version, I used Docker 18, and then, but I used the commands that were from the ECR example, and which is what we did manually. Basically, I'm logging in basically as the user, right? And then I'm building the image, I'm tagging the image, and then I'm posting the image to that repository. So that's what I did here. So it's kind of a mixture of two things. I went ahead and committed that to the repo and pushed it. So it's now, that file now sits on my repo. So let me show that, I guess. Go to this, if I go to here, and if I go to CodeCommit, and repositories, that file now sits right here, build spec. Okay, the next thing we need to do is build a code build. So you go to CodeBuild. Now I already did this once, so I'm going to delete it and redo it. Hopefully I get it right on the second pass. So I already did this exercise, so I'm going to delete this one. Delete build project. And then I'm going to just recreate it. Okay, now, well, let's hope this all works. Okay, say create a project, and the project name is going to be called Backend, and there's a lot of steps in here. So, okay, so the source is going to come from CodeCommit. That's fine. Repository is the Backend repository. We're going to go pull from a branch. We're going to use the master branch as where we're going to do our builds from. We're going to use a manage image, and I'm just going to pick, I went through the documentation. They're basically suggesting that Ubuntu is the recommended solution here, so I used it. I'm going to use standard because it's the only choice here. Image, I'm going to use the largest version that they seem to share. Leave everything alone. It says if you're going to do Docker images, you need to check this box, so I'll check that box. Now, it says create a new service role. Now, I actually did this earlier, so I'm going to use an existing service role. And I have to find the service role. Okay, well, I did this a minute ago, and it automatically created that service role. So let me go into AWS console. Oops. Block. Just give me, oh my goodness, my fingers are sweaty apparently. Okay, I'm losing my mind here. Why can't I type? Okay, let me do this again. I just need to go to a console. AWS console. Okay. I log in. My goodness. I need to go to IAM. Roles. And again, I did this earlier, and it created a role for me. There it is right here. And then I need this IRN. Now, one thing I did do, by the way, and this is something when you go through this, it will automatically create it with this CodeBuild phase policy backend policy, right? But we also need to add another one because this part of the build process we need to actually push to that container registry. So we add that power users, registry power users to this credentials when we're done with this exercise, right? So I already did this, so I added this. So this when the build happens, this build user will also, a build role will also be able to push the registry. So that's just kind of a side note. So I'm going to copy this role since I've already done this before, and I need to paste it in here. Oh, I guess it was already pickable. I'll let that checkbox stay. Use the build spec file. There's no artifacts. I'll leave all the logs the same. Create the build project. And okay, so then we'll try to do a build. And Backend. You got all the defaults here. Start build. And then we'll kind of watch it. Now I'm going to pause the video here because it just takes like about a minute or two. So let me pause the video. Ran for about 2-3 minutes, and it says succeeded. And you can actually look at the logs down here, and you can see that basically it did essentially, it does say it's using Docker 19. So I guess Docker 18 is now replaced by 19. I'll leave it 18 since it was in their docs, but it looks like 19 would have been probably the right choice. It basically, what did it do? It basically did that login, right? So it properly logged in to ECR, which was a good thing. It ran the build, to-dos are us, pulled all that stuff down. That's all through here. It tagged it with the latest version of that repository, and it looks like it did a push and successfully pushed it up. So that's expected, essentially what we did manually from the command line. And then we can go into ECR and validate that we got a new image here. So we have a new image called latest. And you can see this was just built a few minutes ago, 3:11, that's like 2 minutes ago, right? So we have our build process now working where we're basically pushing to the repository to latest, the newest version of the image. So I'm going to pause the video again and see, our goal really is to get our ECS instance to be running this latest version, not the old version. So we'll explore that in the next part of this video. So we're just regrouping here. So we had just done a push, right? We pushed a new version of the build. That triggered a build, which then put a new version of the Docker image into the repository, right? And the question is, well, now how do we deploy, get our ECS service? All these, everything's elastic with Amazon, but how do we use get ECS to actually deploy the newest version? So it took me a while to kind of Google through this, and it turns out that there's an easy button way, and we're going to do that right now, the easy button way, which is we actually go into the service itself here, and you just do an update. And it took me a while to find this little button, this force new employment. It says force new, whether or not to force new deployment of the service, right? So this is basically cause it to pick up the new version of the latest, regardless, and then actually do another deployment. So I basically hit next, next step. So nothing functionally has changed other than the fact that I deployed a new version in the repository. And then I hit update service. And then if I view the service, this takes like 5 minutes or so, but you'll see right now, see there's now 2 deployments in play. So this one, the bottom one, is active. That's the old deployment. So it has 3 running. And then the new one has 3 desired. And what you do is you just basically wait 5 minutes. And what you'll start to see is this top one will start filling up. And the bottom will then start to drain. And then you basically swap them out. And I'm going to have to investigate this separately. But these values here, the minimum and maximum, those are, I believe, and something I'll verify separately, is related to how it staggers these, about how many it needs to have running before it starts draining. Right now, the behavior seems to be it's actually going to create all three before the draining starts happening. I believe that's related to this 100% minimum healthy percent. Okay, that's it for this video. I'm not going to, you're just going to have to trust me. I just did this a few minutes ago. It takes about 5 minutes, and this will basically swap them all out.